Hello, welcome to week 6. This week we're going to take a look at culture. So I thought I would just hit some of the highlights of chapter 9 and 10, which are your reading assignments for this week. To begin with, culture shapes value by framing everyday life in the terms of commonly held societal beliefs and the appropriate age at which it's okay to have a cup of coffee, have your own cell phone, drink a glass of wine with a family, or go to the mall without an adult. It varies from culture to culture. And this slide kind of gives us an idea of what culture is. It's what a person consumes, helps determine acceptance by other consumers in society. And culture derives differences in the customs associated with special events such as weddings and marriages and such. Consumer culture is a commonly held societal belief that defines what is socially gratifying, and it determines the consumption behaviors that are acceptable. Culture and meaning are inseparable, and so in when we're looking at today's marketplace, it is very like global, and but without culture, consumers would have little guidance as to appropriate actions in many common customer situations. And one of the things that being global, it has created, you know, it has put this diversity all together and made our world and the world of consumer decisions, consumer behavior quite interesting. And it does perform important functions for customers. And these functions shape the value of our activities, like giving meaning to activities and facilitating communication. Our cultural norms, where they're closely intertwined, this is a rule that specifies appropriate consumer behavior in a given situation within specific culture. And not all of them, but most of our cultural norms are unwritten, and they are just simply kind of understood by the members of that cultural group. So, for example, in many countries, consumers do not routinely drink out of a bottle or can like we may here in the United States. And the cultural expectation is that consumers should pour their drink into a glass before drinking it. For instance, Koreans hold this custom very strongly. So in places like Korea, by pouring a drink into a glass, the customer performs a socially rewarding or valuable act that's consistent with the norms of that society. And so, where does our culture come from? Researchers use culture to explain and predict customer behavior. It does cause differences in values that we as consumers perceive. And the things that cause it involve the ecological factors, and traditional. The ecological factors are physical characteristics that describe the physical environment and habitat of a particular place. And of course, traditions are just things that the customs and accepted ways of everyday behavior in a given culture. And this diagram is really nice as it shows you the inputs and outputs and how all this kind of continuously revolves. As I mentioned, we do use culture a lot to help explain and predict consumer behavior. And we can see here how tradition and ecology come together to influence our culture. And then each culture will have different core social or societal values. And these will drive differences in consumer behaviors and the value that we derive from them. More than 10% of all explanations of some consumer behavior include culture as a key factor. And so these cultural beliefs define what religion is acceptable, what types of art and recreation are preferred, what manners are considered polite, the roles and expectations of individuals, and so much more. So, distinguishing the unique effects of culture over these specific expectations is extremely difficult since these expectations tend to function together inside that culture. Here we can see the core societal value dimensions. These are covered in great detail in the chapter, and it is very beneficial for you, of course, to read these. We do have individualism, masculinity, power distance, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence, and the most widely applied dimensions that help us describe differences in cultural values are these that were developed by Gert Hofstede. And the theory of value-based differences in cultures is based on these multiple dimensions, and each represent an identifiable core of the societal value aspect. And so, how do we learn our culture? Consumers learn culture through one of two socialization process, inculturalization and um, acculturalization. Those are challenging words to say. And as consumers interact, they begin to model or kind of mirror the behaviors learned or seen. And reinforcement occurs through the process of rewarding actions or sanctions. And so, that socialization is where we are observing what's going on around us, and then we're actually active processing of the information. And the inculturalization is the way we learn our native culture, and it represents ways that consumers learn and develop shared understanding, things like objects and products and services, rituals with their family. For instance, think about um, how the brand of vehicles that is purchased seems to pass down generation over generation within a family. My husband's grandfather purchased Chevy vehicles. My father-in-law purchased Chevy vehicles, and now my husband purchased Chevy vehicles, and now our son does. So those are just ways that's kind of our native culture. Think about what is passed down, kind of like a ritual or a particular type of product or something in through the generations of your family. That's inculturalization. Agriculturalization, when we become agricultured, chances are that old beliefs have been replaced by new beliefs. And so then children generally become agricultured more quickly than adults because the old rules are not as old, and they are less resistant to change. And this agricultural is just when consumers come to learn a culture other than their natural native culture. Maybe they've moved to a new location, or trends are just changing. So that was chapter 9, all about culture. Like I said, please do read it. In chapter 10, we take a look at what we call microcultures. And we can think of a given culture as containing multiple smaller and more specific microcultures. And this is a group of people who share similar values and tastes that are uh, subsumed within the larger culture. And these microcultures can be quite distinct from the larger group or overall culture. They're often used to capture much of the same idea. It is smaller, but it's not any less significant in the influence on consumer behavior. And it's similar to some ways to the group influence topic. However, the multicultures are generally based on specific variables. So let's take a look at this. It is hierarchical, and so culture ultimately explains habits and idiosyncrasies of all groups of consumers. And we can belong, as a consumer, we can belong to many cultural groups. Just think of work and maybe family, and then maybe you play some kind of a sport, or you're part of a reading club, or whatever. And you kind of move in and out of these microcultures. And as I mentioned, microculture is hierarchical, and you belong to one large overall culture and then many microcultures. So let me give you an example. So a college student from Texas who is attending a state university in another state is likely part of an American culture, also a Texas culture, an ethnically defined a culture such as Hispanic culture, the university culture, and possibly they're part of a Greek fraternity. So there's a Greek culture, and so they're part of many different, like I said, microcultures that make up the whole individual. And this is just a nice diagram that shows us where we start at the top, and then we can kind of just continue breaking down. And the book actually talks about all of these, so please do jump in and read them. I'm not going to have time in this video to explain all of them, but it's so cool to learn about culture and just how it influences our lives. So let's look at the microcultural roles and values real quick. This membership of the microculture, it does change the values of things. And in one little microculture, we may think one way, and the other one may influence us in another way. So let's look at soccer fans, right? Big sport in America. Many American customers find watching it dull. Thus, it's a low value activity. But it is number one spectator sport in other parts of the world. And cultural groups even arise within sports fans. So extreme fans may become hooligans. And so, there are even within soccer, you have the proverbial soccer mom, right? And so your parental soccer fans, and there's just so many different smaller groups there, and the divergence is when our consumers choose membership in these microcultures in an effort to stand out or define themselves from the crowd. It's like we are finding our people or our tribe. So just real quickly to look at the major United States microcultures, marketers have divided the United States population into consumer groups along a number of dimensions relative to market segmentation. The 9-nation approach in segmentation, it captures the fact that that priorities among consumers will vary regionally. So, for example, a brand and food preference choice. A brand or food, sorry, a brand or food preference, a choice of a favorite beverage, favorite sports, and these things can change according to region. And that's one microculture. One idea that pops to my mind is iced tea. I love iced tea, but I like sweet iced tea. When I go out west, they don't serve sweet iced tea, so it's just little things like that. And then the different microcultures other than regional that is mentioned, is discussed in a book, is excuse me, sex and gender roles in microculture. There's the age-based microculture, generational cohort microculture, religious, ethnic, income and social class, and then what we call street microculture. So read those. It is just really cool to see how research has defined out individuals across the United States using these microcultures, and try to determine which one you are in. Some of them it's pretty easy. You know what generational cohort you belong to. Um, but try to identify which one you belong in with each one of those different microcultures. And then to wrap up chapter 10, they talk about a demographic analysis, which is very valuable, especially with doing your target market. And these variables help the marketer to describe these microcultures. So, for example, a demographic variable, age, helps us to better understand and describe the microculture. Geodemographic tools such as the website Prism. It's really cool. You should go in there and use their zip code lookup and see what the makeup of your hometown, your community is. It's really, really cool. And it assists a consumer researcher to in doing what we call this demographic analysis. And we can identify where target customers live, what newspapers they read, radio they listen to, TV that they watch, and even the internet communications can be geared to those specific regions. And in today's world of digital advertising, we can set that advertising up according to those particular regions and really target. And so that's very cool. And it does give us an opportunity to profile our consumer group based on those demographics. One way we can gather some of that information is through the U.S. Census Bureau, .census.gov, and it gives us so much information, all the way down to just the smaller communities, and it's very credible and it's very reliable. And another one is the CIA World Fact Book that can be used to analyze market segments. And finally, the cultural and demographic trends. These are things that are just constantly changing, and we have to keep an eye on it. That's this part of our external environment that you probably learned all the way down at Intro to Marketing, right? And these trends are especially important to monitor. The four notable trends that are relevant today is the declining birth rate. So there's not as many babies being born. Consumers have way more power today in what is, what the product is, what the prices are, and how it's delivered and everything than what we did just 10, 15 years ago. We are getting older, so that's changing a lot of things in consumer behavior. And there's great cultural diversity clear across the world. So it is safe to say that the use of that demographic analysis, just is not enough to help us understand consumer behavior. We have to mix in other variables such as the culture, the microculture, lifestyle, and even the life stage, like married with children or empty nester or whatever. And these variables often reveal much better information about consumer behavior today. So a 30-year-old today is totally different than a 30-year-old in 1950. So that's the end of my relatively short video. It looks like we're about 20 minutes, and I hope this is helpful. And I encourage you to read the chapters. It's really, really cool information. And until next week, have a good day.